This is the story of a locked vault, a denied requisition form, and the chilling realization that proximity to the king does not grant you mastery over the crown. In less than 24 hours deep within the subterranean archives of the royal collection, the illusion of absolute power was quietly dismantled. What Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that wearing the Crown Consort's diamonds does not mean you own them. The ultimate humiliation did not unfold in the press or through a leaked palace shouting match. It was executed silently through a single administrative denial issued by the one woman who has spent her entire life protecting the institution, the Princess Royal. This video will unpack the secret power grab Camilla attempted regarding the monarchy's most sacred assets. How Princess Anne quietly uncovered the paper trail and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. We are going to examine the exact moment ancient administrative protocol was weaponized to execute a masterclass in institutional revenge. It is a story about the devastating realization that beneath the velvet robes and the public deference, Camilla actually owns nothing and her access can be revoked with the stroke of a pen. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of this invisible strike, we must first rebuild the illusion of absolute power that the Queen Consort had so meticulously constructed. For 30 years, she executed the most calculated game of institutional survival in modern history. She endured the intense public vitriol following the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. She slowly, methodically rehabilitated her image, utilizing a compliant press and leveraging Charles's unwavering, almost desperate devotion to wedge herself into the very center of the British monarchy. She orchestrated the slow institutional erasure of Diana's legacy, ensuring her own survival was inextricably linked to Charles's reign. She believed that if she could control the man, she would eventually control the machinery of the palace. The coronation was supposed to be the final untouchable victory. When she had Queen Mary's crown modified and placed on her head, she believed the transformation was absolute. She operated under the certainty that the ghost of the past had been exorcised and that she was now the undisputed matriarch of the Windsor dynasty. She felt untouchable. And as history often proves, the arrogance of that moment led to a staggering overreach. She began to blur the lines between the ancient royal bloodline and her own private family interests, extending her reach beyond her ceremonial role and into the physical wealth of the institution. Before this administrative reckoning, palace insiders noticed a subtle but undeniable shift in how Camilla engaged with the Royal Collection Trust. The trust is not a personal jewelry box, it is a highly regulated, historically sacred repository of the crown's wealth encompassing priceless gems art and artifacts. Camilla began initiating requests to secure long-term loans of highly significant pieces, not just for state occasions, but seemingly to normalize her total command over the vaults. What appeared to be a queen consort simply organizing her wardrobe was actually a deeply strategic move. She was testing the boundaries of her access, attempting to establish a precedent that she had unrestricted, unquestioned authority over the most valuable physical assets of the British monarchy. She fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the institution she had married into. She thought she had conquered the system because the king was compliant. She did not realize the system has ancient built-in immune responses designed to protect the crown from staggering exploitation. And she entirely underestimated the true gatekeeper of that system. Enter Princess Anne. The Princess Royal does not care about public relations media spin or the daily emotional weather of her older brother. Anne is the daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, a woman who spent 70 years sublimating her personal desires for the survival of the institution. Anne operates with cold, unsentimental duty. She watched for decades as Camilla's presence caused catastrophic damage to the family's public standing. Anne's silence over the years was never approval. It was merely a calculated endurance, waiting for the moment when the integrity of the crown was genuinely threatened. As the hardest working royal and a senior figure heavily involved in the oversight of royal protocols, Anne has unparalleled visibility into the internal machinery of the palace. When the requisition forms and the subtle administrative requests from Camilla's office began crossing the desks of the Lord Chamberlain and the keepers of the Privy Purse, the paper trail of this secret power grab became glaringly obvious. Camilla was attempting to bypass the strict historical guidelines that separate the reigning monarch's bloodline from the consort's temporary privileges. Princess Anne did not confront her sister-in-law in a hallway. She did not issue a public statement or wage a media war. That is the behavior of the powerless, and Anne holds absolute institutional gravity. The powerful do not need to raise their voices, they simply enforce the rules. What happened next was a masterclass in cold institutional retaliation, and utilized her profound knowledge of royal protocol to silently close the vault. She liaised with the keepers of the royal collection and the senior courtiers who manage the crown's heritage assets. A routine administrative review was quietly initiated. The guidelines regarding the dispersion and lending of historically significant items were tightened, specifically referencing ancient protocols that prioritized the direct lineage of the monarch and the future Queen Catherine. When Camilla's office submitted their next request for a highly visible, historically significant piece of jewelry for an upcoming engagement, expecting the standard immediate approval, they were met with a chilling bureaucratic reality. The request was intercepted, it was politely, formally, and definitively denied. The paperwork simply stated that the item was unavailable for dispatch, citing the newly reinforced preservation protocols. She was not banned from wearing jewelry. That would create a tabloid headline. Instead, her access was fundamentally downgraded. She was relegated to the secondary tier of the collection, stripped of the invisible shield of absolute royal authority. That detail matters immensely. In the highly coded world of the British monarchy, having a requisition form denied by the palace bureaucracy is not an oversight. It is an execution. It is a very clear, deeply humiliating message that your proximity to the king does not override the ancient laws of the crown. The moral outrage behind Anne's maneuver was absolute. This was not just about protecting diamonds. This was about drawing a permanent line in the sand to defend the sacredness of the institution from commercial desperation. Anne was ensuring that the heritage her mother protected, the legacy that rightfully belongs to William and Catherine, would not be exploited or permanently attached to a woman who is in the eyes of the Constitution a temporary custodian. Princess Anne weaponized administrative restraint by enforcing strict compliance with royal protocol. She exposed the devastating contrast between Camilla's public image as an all-powerful queen and her private reality as an individual with zero ancestral claim to the wealth she wears. Behind closed doors, the realization hit Camilla with terrifying clarity. She realized that her title was a ceremonial facade. She has no inherent power over the vaults, no ownership of the estates, and no independent wealth within the firm. Her entire ability to project royal majesty is entirely reliant on the tolerance of a system she does not control. And so, facing the sudden reality of her own vulnerability, she did the only thing she could do. She turned to King Charles. She demanded that he intervene. She expected him to overrule his sister, to bypass the Royal Collection Trust, and to prove once and for all that his love for her was more powerful than the institution itself. But as she stood before the king, presenting the denied paperwork and demanding the unwavering defense she had relied on for 3 decades, the trap finally snapped shut. She expected the king to lash out. She expected him to demand that the Princess Royal immediately override the administrators and restore her total unchecked access to the royal collection. She had spent 30 years cultivating the belief that her desires were synonymous with the king's will, and that any obstacle placed in her path was merely a misunderstanding to be corrected by a royal decree. She stood in the study, radiating the indignation of a woman who'd been told no for the first time in her life. She demanded that Charles force the issue. She demanded that he reassert his authority over the institution. But as she looked into Charles's eyes, the cold, suffocating reality of the monarchy's survival set in. King Charles did nothing. He did not call Anne. He did not berate the keepers of the privy purse. He simply turned away. This was not an act of cowardice, it was an act of survival. Charles knows that his reign is a bridge, not a terminal point. He understands that if he breaks the rules for Camilla's personal satisfaction, he effectively ruptures the foundation of the very institution he is meant to preserve. The silence in that room was the loudest, most devastating sound Camilla had ever heard. It was the confirmation that the king would not burn the building down to keep her comfortable. For the first time in 3 decades, she felt the chilling draft of isolation. This brings us to the core of the institutional crisis, Camilla's commercial desperation. The public sees the crown and the jewels and assumes they are hers. The truth enforced by the very protocols Anne just weaponized is that Camilla is a life tenant, not an owner. She has no ancestral claim to the properties at Sandringham, no control over the duchy's purse strings, and no legal authority to distribute the crown's physical assets. When the Princess Royal moved the boundaries of the archives, she wasn't just protecting jewelry, she was defining the perimeter of Camilla's power. She was showing her that the walls of the palace are not there to keep the world out, but to keep the unauthorized from moving deeper into the institutional core. The new order is being signalled in ways the public is only just beginning to notice. We see it in the jewellery. The most significant historically heavy pieces, the ones that signify the continuity of the monarchy, are being worn by Catherine. We see it in the portraits. The erasure is subtle yet absolute. Images of the past are being rehung in the grand corridors, and the presence of Camilla's personal family is being quietly but firmly pushed out of the frame of official state photography. It is a slow, professional, and entirely legal removal of her footprint. William and Anne are not acting out of malice. They are acting out of an institutional mandate. They have concluded that the future of the crown depends on the restoration of its traditional boundaries. They are ensuring that when the transition eventually happens, there will be no ambiguity about who the monarchy belongs. 2. Catherine is being positioned as the center of gravity. Her stoicism, her commitment to protocol, and her bloodline are being highlighted as the antidote to the chaos of the previous 3 decades. The system is healing itself, and the primary mechanism of that healing is the quiet, systematic exclusion of those who do not belong to the core. Camilla continues to walk the red carpet. She continues to wave from the balcony, but the luster is different now. It is the performance of a woman who knows she is holding a temporary pass. She is living with the daily suffocating knowledge that she is merely a steward of a power that can be withdrawn the moment the crown decides she is no longer necessary. She won the title she spent a lifetime pursuing, only to discover that the title came with no keys to the kingdom. As we watch these shifts unfold, it becomes clear that this is not a tabloid saga. It is a slow, high-stakes realignment of power that will define the next century of the British monarchy. The era of the interloper is ending, and the era of the bloodline is returning. Executed not with a shout, but with a stamp on a rejection form. If this forensic look at the hidden mechanisms of the monarchy has changed the way you view the royal power dynamic, please subscribe and join us for the next deep dive into the lives of those who live under the shadow of the crown.